Jenny stayed late again to finish up some reports for her boss. It was after midnight and the office was empty except for the cleaning crew she could hear vacuuming a few rooms down. She typed furiously, trying to get the reports done so she could finally go home and collapse into bed. As she worked, she started to feel like someone was watching her. She paused and looked around the dark office cautiously. "Hello?" she called out nervously. No one answered. She shook her head and went back to typing, telling herself she was just tired and imagining things. But the creepy feeling persisted. The fine hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She glanced over her shoulder and let out a gasp. For just a split second she saw a dark, shadowy figure standing in the doorway staring at her. Jenny leapt up, heart pounding. "Who's there?" Silence. She flicked on the lights. No one was there. Jenny felt a chill run down her spine. She decided she needed to get out of there right away. She packed up her things hurriedly, shutting down her computer and throwing files into her bag. As she turned to leave, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the office into darkness. Jenny froze, afraid to move. Then she heard it, a sinister chuckle coming from directly behind her. She whirled around but couldn't see anything in the pitch-black office. Terrified, she fumbled through the dark towards where she knew the door was. Just as her hand grasped the door handle, she felt an icy, cold hand grasp her wrist. Jenny's heart slammed against her ribs as the icy hand clenched her wrist in the darkness. She tried to scream, but only a strangled gasp came out. The freezing hand held her in an iron grip, preventing her from wrenching away and fleeing the office. Turning her head slowly, she strained her eyes, trying to make out who or what had grabbed her. But it was useless. The room was enveloped in a void-like blackness. She could barely see her own trembling hand outstretched in front of her face. The cold hand started to slowly pull her deeper into the dark office, away from the door. She resisted, pulling back with all her strength, her shoes slipping on the smooth floor. As she was dragged along, her fingers scrambled for something, anything to grab onto. But all they felt was empty air. Blind terror constricted her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Her heart pounded wildly as she realized she was being drawn closer to something sinister hiding in the impenetrable darkness. She opened her mouth, trying again to scream, to call for help, but her vocal cords constricted with fear, the scream dying in her throat. Tears of frustration and despair sprang to her eyes. She was alone. No one would hear or come to her aid. The icy grip on her wrist tightened, causing shooting pain. She continued resisting each pull, digging her heels into the floor, but she felt her strength waning. Exhaustion and dread washed over her. Her shoulders sagged in defeat as she realized she could not fight off this unseen evil. As she was pulled further into the dark, she feared this may be the end. She closed her eyes, silently praying and hoping for a miracle. Jenny's prayers went unanswered as the icy grip dragged her deeper into the dark void of the office. No matter how hard she struggled and dug her heels in, she could not break free from the spectral hand clenched around her wrist. She tried bargaining with whatever had her in its clutches, offering up anything, her jewelry, her money, even her own life, if it would just let her go. But she received no response besides the continual chilling pull on her arm. Her throat burned from mute screams and suppressed sobs of terror. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks now. She wanted so badly to collapse to the floor in despair, but the hand kept her upright, forcing her onward through the darkness. After what felt like an eternity of being dragged across the office, Jenny bumped into something solid, a wall. The hand released its grip, and Jenny crumpled to the floor in exhaustion. She sat with her back pressed against the cool wall, trying to slow her ragged breathing. The room was dead silent now, except for the thunderous pounding of her heart. She kept her eyes clenched shut, not wanting to see what lurked in the darkness mere feet from her. She jumped as she felt a rush of icy air sweep over her face. Something, or someone, was leaning in close. She held perfectly still. A scream caught in her throat as she felt an invisible presence hovering over her. An odor invaded her senses, a musty, damp smell like a long-sealed tomb being opened. The urge to gag was overwhelming, but Jenny resisted, knowing any movement could make the entity attack. Seconds stretched on like hours as she sat paralyzed against the wall. Her body shivered uncontrollably from intense cold and terror. Just when she thought she could bear it no longer, she felt a whisper in her ear. The whisper in Jenny's ear was raspy and hollow, sending chills down her spine. She could not make out any words, only sinister hissing. The phantom presence leaned closer, its breath icy on her skin. She clenched her jaw tight, willing herself not to scream or move a muscle. Suddenly, a deafening bang shattered the silence. Jenny jumped and cried out before slamming her hand over her mouth. Heavy footsteps and voices were approaching, accompanied by blinding flashlight beams shining into the darkness. "Police! Is anyone there?" a man's voice called out. Overcome with relief, Jenny found her voice. "I'm here! I'm over here!" she cried out hoarsely. The police officers rushed over, illuminating the area with their flashlights. Jenny squinted against the bright beams, eyes adjusting from pitch blackness to harsh light. That's when she saw it, the ghostly pale face hovering a foot from her own. She recoiled in terror, trying to scramble away along the wall. But the officers grabbed her arms, pulling her up and away from the area. "It's all right, miss, you're safe now," one assured her. Jenny's wide eyes remained fixed on the shadowy figure. But as the police lights bathed the area, she realized it was not a ghost at all. It was a man, disheveled and wild-eyed, dressed all in black to blend into the darkness. Shocked, Jenny looked closer at him, past the tangled hair and deranged eyes. With a start, she recognized him as William, one of her co-workers. He had always been odd, but she never imagined him capable of something so twisted. As the police arrested William, Jenny shuddered, realizing how close she had come to being another victim of his psychotic breakdown. The phantom had been flesh and blood all along, but she knew she would never look at her office the same way again.